Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome everybody to the February 2025 Harbor Commission regular meeting. I'm Chair Adam Stanowick, and let's get started with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Ford?
Here.
Commissioner McCray is absent tonight. Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Stedman?
Here.
Chair Stanowick.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Director Wiltshire, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
No changes. We just wanted to thank Angelo Rodriguez for covering Nico. He's out today. And also Nathan Aldridge is sick today, so I'll be covering his part.
Got it. Thanks. And thanks, Angela.
Of course.
Okay, do we have any general public comment? I believe we do have public comment for item numbers 2 and 5, but is there any general public comment?
I'm not seeing any hands raised online at the moment, but we do have one general public comment speaker in the room, Mr. Scott Burns.
Great, thank you. Mr. Burns. Yep, Mr. Burns, welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Welcome, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you guys for doing.
Oh.
What?
Is the microphone on? It is, okay. Okay, yep.
I don't talk very loud, I'll try again. First, I want to thank you guys for doing what you're doing. I was on the Park and Rec Commission for a few years, and nobody ever thanks you. So just file that away. I have a boat at 3C11, and there's this big brown vessel that I'm not sure what it's called at the end, closest to the harbor, closest to the slip. And a couple of years ago, there was a lot of lines on it and ropes and things trying to keep it so it wouldn't bang into the side of the harbor. And then you guys put a new piling in, and it seemed like it was okay. And then a couple of days ago, I was down at my boat, and I've noticed more ropes. And I realize this is a public comment, so you can't really do anything about it, but I hope you guys would look at it and maybe decide that that boat weighs so much that it really can't be in the harbor at that location, because it's an issue. You don't really want to hurt everybody else because of that. Anyway, just a public comment. My wife is wondering why I'm not home, so thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Do we have any other general public comment?
I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We move on to the work group reports. Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. Well, we do have a report from Strategic Planning Work Group. Commissioner Stedman and I met with Director Wiltshire on January 28th, and we reviewed the second data dashboard draft that was created by Director Wiltshire, and it was based on our discussions and suggested edits and additions, and we're almost there, so thank you, Director Wiltshire. We also discussed possible next steps in the waterfront strategic planning process. We agreed that a discussion and clarification on leases is a priority, as you have seen in tonight's agenda, and that in March, Director Wiltshire will share some possible next steps for our consideration. This will include possible options regarding commitments of scope, of time, and of dollars. And Commissioner Nelson now will share a summary of research he conducted on other port planning processes and funding.
Thanks, Vice Chair Ford. I just touched base with a couple of, we kind of wanted to know what were other ports doing along the coast. Is it unusual for us to consider a harbor master plan or a strategic plan or a business plan, or is that something that is unusual? Well, it's not unusual. In fact, just about every port that I contacted has, not only do they have a harbor master plan, but they have a routine where every 1 or 2 years they update them. And so, for example, the city of Morro Bay right now is updating its plan and has received a $750,000 grant from the Coastal Commission to do that plan update, as well as the sea level rise adaptation work. When I went to I bumped into some folks recently from Fort Bragg and Noyo Harbor. They, in fact, did a blue economy visioning study, a infrastructure plan for Noyo Harbor, and they too received $898,000 from the Coastal Commission. The third one that I spent some time with was the County of Ventura, and in 2021, they did a visioning study. Not nearly as expensive as the previous two that I referenced. They hired a company for $99,000, and the way they were able to do that is that they did a lot of the interviews with stakeholders and then sort of presented the information to their consultant who put it into a format, and that was $99,000, and they funded that from their Harbor Capital Projects Fund. So many, if not most, ports along the coast are, in fact, have current harbor master plans and update them routinely. But I think most importantly, in previous discussion the commission had, is we weren't looking to, create a financial problem, an operating budget problem for the waterfront department with a huge expenditure of, $1 million for a multi-year planning exercise. We thought there ought to be a way to do it in an abbreviated planning exercise, but also one that would cost less and, most importantly, could be funded by an outside grant. So the one thing that my little bit of research has concluded is that it can be done. And most notably, anybody that's read in the newspapers, in the Independent or the News Hawk, the city recently scored a major, I think about $1.3 million to do a sea level rise adaptation study, and it's funded by the Coastal Commission. So essentially what they're doing is what Morro Bay is doing, only Morro Bay is doing sea level adaptation, and they added updating their harbor master plan to that ask. So part of me thinks that a recommendation ought to be for the waterfront department to talk to the sustainability group and see what the terms of that multi-year project was, because the Coastal Commission has about, they awarded about $30 million this year for local projects, and it's called the Local Assistance Program, which is used to update local coastal plans, harbor master plans, and that sort. So I don't know what the funding status is there, but I've got a feeling that were the waterfront department to engage them or to discuss that with the sustainability department, who's got a big $1.3 million coastal grant, there may be an opportunity for funding for what we propose. And if not, we should consider whether or not the city would entertain an application to the local assistant program for whatever strategic planning exercise we proceed with.
Thanks for all your work on that. I think that concludes work groups.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the consent calendar. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please read item number 1, the recommendation?
Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Recommendation that Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the special meeting of January 14th, 2025, and the regular meeting of January 16th, 2025.
Great, thank you. And this is the approval of 2 minutes, the special meeting and the regular meeting from January. So with that, do we invite a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please do a vote?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Ford?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes?
Commissioner Stedman?
Aye.
Chair Stanowicz.
Yes.
That's unanimous with Commissioner McCray absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on now to new business. Item number 2. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please read item number 2, the recommendation?
Item number 2, converting California Sea Urchin Commission of Santa Barbara licensed space into 9 new designated commercial fishing slip permits. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to City Council to convert dock space currently governed by a license agreement with California Sea Urchin Commission into 9 individual designated commercial fishing slips located on the north side of Cabrillo Landing, formerly known as Cuda Dock, in the Santa Barbara Harbor.
Thank you. All right, we turn it over to the waterfront. Thanks.
Good evening, Chair Stanaway, Commissioners, members of the public. My name is Cesar Barrios. I am the Waterfront Business Manager. And today I bring to you a recommendation to designate the north side of the Cabrillo Landing dock space, also known as Cuda Dock, into commercial fishing slips. And for the context of the discussion, Cuda Dock stands, those original license from back in 1987, and it stands for California Urchin Divers Association, which is no longer a group, but it was replaced with the current association. So for some background, so here you have the Cuda Dock in this image. Well, the Cabrillo Landing, it's located on the northwest corner of the Santa Barbara Harbor. The California Sea Urchin Commission has maintained a license agreement in this area since 1987, again, previously known as CUDA. Per the latest license agreement, this area can accommodate up to 9 commercial fishing vessels, and that's based on the length of 30 foot per each vessel. And as you can see in this image, we have 9 vessels at that location. The latest license agreement expired on August 31st of 2024. And is currently on a holdover status, basically on a month-to-month while we're handling this process. It is worth noting that this area has functioned independently of the commercial slip permit policy since inception of the license agreement back in the 80s. So that means that the Waterfront Department does not have any direct oversight over any of the 9 vessels that have been berthed at this location. And in part, the license has been the licensee has been the primary regulator of this area as far as all the requirements within that license. Okay, so as the license agreement was coming to an end in August of 2024, the Waterfront Department engaged the California Sea Urchin Commission representatives, as well as the Commercial Fishing Work Group, and following several discussions and meetings, it was determined and mutually agreed to forego the continuation of a license agreement and designate the 9 slip commercial fishing slips to be governed under the commercial fishing policy as slip permits. So the proposed change will facilitate a smooth transition, or the proposed changes I have in this presentation will facilitate a smooth transition into this process, while addressing some of the challenges some of the current operators have faced meeting the commercial fishing earning requirements, which the license did not require. For context, again, this group started with this area back in the 80s. Not until 2001 is when the Waterfront Department enacted the commercial fishing policy, which required a number of landings and overall for commercial vessels that berth in the harbor. So as part of this process, of this proposed changes, we're proposing to integrate these 9 slips into the current commercial fishing policy, allowing the existing eligible occupants to operate under the standard policy, regulating commercial fishing slips and permits. So recent evaluations that were handled at the department level and with the commercial fishing work group indicated that these 9 slips making this change would improve the commercial fishing activities within this space, provide opportunity for dock space to season and any new fishers that may be interested in getting a space in the harbor, which right now it's basically at capacity. And it would ensure compliance of the current regulatory standards in the Santa Barbara Harbor. As I mentioned, the license did not have a provision for any type of regulation that would match the commercial fishing policy with other slips. As far as cost goes, the current commercial fishing rate is $7.02 per foot. So on average, the 30-foot vessel would pay about $210 per month once if this proposal is moved forward. Number two, issuance of slip permits. So with this proposal, commercial fishing slip permits will be issued to eligible occupants who are current vessel owners listed on the most recent license agreement. To be eligible, vessel owners must meet the commercial fishing policy requirements, including maintaining an operable vessel and meeting the minimum fish landing requirements, which is $15,000 for every 2 years. The mechanism or process will ensure continuity for the existing operators who are active commercial fishermen. Okay, so moving on, point number three. This proposed change is intended to provide a grace period for landing requirements. So this refers to the $15,000 fish landing requirement that I spoke about, which is active and required under the current commercial fishing policy. And as part of the negotiations with the existing vessel operators, to address some of the challenges they've had meeting the landing requirements, considering it was not part of the previous license. The Waterfront Department is proposing to provide this 6-month grace period in good faith to support and allow those commercial fishers that have not yet met that minimum requirement to be able to go out to sea and fish. So the 6-month grace period would take effect at the time the City Council resolution becomes effective. Next and last proposed change would deem these 9 commercial fishing slips as non-transferable, meaning they cannot be sold or transferred to another party. Should a slip permittee surrender the slip back to the Waterfront Department, it will be assigned to another eligible commercial fishing boat owner through the commercial fishing slip lottery. This would ensure an equitable access to all qualified applicants. Again, it could be a long-standing fisher, it could be someone that's just getting started in the business. It will give them an opportunity to have a space in the harbor to conduct their business. Also, as part of this process, slip permits received from the commercial fishing slip lottery are not subject to a transfer fee. So there would not be any transfer fees gains to the city, and also the economic impact to the folks that are getting into the spaces. In order to facilitate the implementation of these proposed changes, the next steps involve going to the Ordinance Committee first, and then City Council for the review and final approval. And the goal will be to repeal Resolution number 14-023, Resolution number 03095, and amend the Title 17 .20 section of the Municipal Code. Primarily, this would include, we're repealing these resolutions and amending the Title 17 primarily would include this section of the Cabrillo Landing into the legal documents that govern the harbor policy. Because currently, the Cabrillo Landing or Cuda Dock are not listed. So basically, this would just add the name of this location to that document without necessarily having to draft specific policy, with the exception of the transferability. So with that, the recommendation I bring to you today is for the Harbor Commission to review and recommend to City Council to convert dock space currently governed by a license agreement into 9 individual designated commercial fishing slips located on the north side of the Cabrillo Landing, formerly known as Cuda Dock. And to conclude my presentation, I would like to add that the proposed amendments to the municipal code and the city council resolutions aim to promote sustainable commercial fishing out of the Santa Barbara Harbor and support active commercial fishers. By integrating the 9 Cabrillo landing slips into the commercial fishing policy, the Waterfront Department aims to enhance the viability and commercial fishing operations in the Santa Barbara Harbor. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Barrios. And kudos to the commercial fishing work group for the work on this. And with that, do we have any questions from the commission? Commissioner Nelson.
Yes, before opening it up, I have personally criticized the Waterfront Department in the past for not spending enough time with stakeholders and trying to work stuff out and having things sort of, blow up in public session. And in this instance, that clearly was not the case. I really think the Waterfront Department made a real serious, sustained effort to try to work this thing out as a license agreement, and then after that, report and include us in those discussions to tell us there was a problem at the Cuda Dock, to take our recommendations, to spend some more time working with the Cuda Association, to even include the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara to try to figure out a better solution, and all of those things were done. And what's before us today is essentially the result of all of that. And I know that there are folks affected by this that wish it wasn't the way it is, but sometimes we don't always get what we want. But one thing's for sure about this is I also recall 2 years ago, the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara encouraged the work group, I guess at the time it was a standing committee, that there ought to be a way to try to find more slips for commercial fishing. And we looked into the history that said there was, 19% was supposed to be designated for that, and now it was between 4 and 5%, and couldn't, under those circumstances, we figure out a way. We didn't tell the Waterfront Department how to get there or what to do or why to do it, but here we are today with the outcome, which I know will not please everyone, but it is an outcome that will permanently increase the number of commercially designated slips, which is in fact consistent with a recommendation that we made long ago.
Thanks, Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner Stedman.
Thank you. This question's for Waterfront. So on 1720, right, which is a pretty extensive policy statement, do you have a set of draft language that would amend 1720 available for us to review?
Commissioner Stedman, yes and no. The changes are pretty minor. We're really just adding language to include that space. And so if you look at the existing commercial fishing policy, it references fish float north, fish float south, like specific called out areas. So it's really just language to add that. We're really bringing this to the Harbor Commission.
Excuse me, Commissioner Nelson, I'm having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
We're really just bringing this to the Harbor Commission to gather your advice and input and then kind of craft that language. We've often been criticized of like bringing fully baked policy to the commission, so this is kind of what it looks like to put that together. But I can assure you the intent is to kind of take this recommendation and do what that means to put it into policy language. But those changes are pretty administrative. They're pretty minor, so it's not really like a whole lot of wordsmithing. It's just making sure what we're saying here happens in policy.
And to go over this process one more time, I know we did on another matter, but if this motion were to go forward, it would go to ordinance, and then would it come back to us for review?
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to. I mean, it would be just another administrative step in the process. I don't think we're going to, if this does pass, there really isn't going to be any surprises with that language. So we can hold off as long as the Harbor Commission would feel comfortable and really bring it back as many times as you guys would like.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thanks for all your work on this. And I appreciate that. I'm curious to hear the comments because we haven't really interacted, or at least I haven't, with the public on this. I'm curious to understand why you feel these slips need to have an additional constraint on them, making them non-transferable.
Yeah, Commissioner Coyle, it's a great question. We talked about it at length. First off, these slips are part of a license agreement, so the folks that are using them did not acquire them by purchasing them. There was no money outlay to acquire them. It just happens to be the folks that are there right now. And so the idea of sort of providing that benefit of essentially a gift of public funds to where they would just all of a sudden be handed slips at value didn't necessarily make sense. Additionally, it solves what has been one of the main complaints since I've been here, is the inability for new fishers to get into the industry without a lot of barriers to entry. So this now gives us 9 slips that are permanently on a commercial fishing wait list where new fishers do not pay a transfer fee. They do not have to come up with large sums of money to somehow purchase that off of some other commercial fisherman. And so in my mind, that's one of the biggest benefits, is we now have these 9 slips that can be utilized without those barriers to entry.
Was there any thought, I mean, I hear you, and those are good reasons, but I'm just concerned because my understanding is that each slip is a fisherman and each fisherman is a business. And in order for those businesses to operate within the harbor, they need to have a slip or they can't. And so I just am concerned that one of the other issues we've heard about is that older fishermen, sometimes want to have someone take over their business, and if that would mean that their business would no longer, have a slip, then I think that would be pretty detrimental. So that's just a concern that I don't know if that was taken into consideration. Maybe it's not a big
It was.
deal.
I think it's a larger problem that slips are off in recreational slips and commercial fishing slips. They're often held onto because of that intrinsic value. And so having more natural turnover with both recreational slips and commercial fishing slips will likely benefit the industry. And so I see what you're saying, but it doesn't necessarily change the fact that somebody on the sidelines who wants to get into fishing can't get a commercial fishing slip. And so this will remove that incentive to simply hang on to it as an asset. Hopefully, when you're done fishing, you can kind of move yourself out of it.
Maybe. I don't know if human nature works that way, though. If you know you're going to let go of something and get compensated for it versus you let go of it and you just have nothing, then I think it might actually have the opposite implications where people hold on instead of moving on when maybe they could, because there's no incentive.
They're governed by the commercial fishing policy, so if they are meeting the terms of that and actually fishing, they should hang on. But if they're not, then they should not.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, by the way, I forgot to say thanks for all your effort. Appreciate it.
And one other thing regarding that concept of a business being transferred, I'm under the impression that slips can be owned by businesses, by LLCs. And so if there is a LLC who owned the fishing slip, they could technically transfer ownership of their LLC without transferring ownership of the slip. Is that correct?
But potentially. That's also one of the concerns, is that anytime slips are non-transferable, people will try and find ways to make sure that they keep them within themselves or someone they know. Our existing commercial fishing policy is very permissive. It allows commercial fishermen to essentially have people fish on their boat for them, as they can fish in other locations, and so our current policy is very permissive and would likely allow that.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Vice Chair Ford.
Thanks. Excellent report. I wonder if, when we were crafting the agenda for this meeting, you had given also some history of the sea urchin fishing business. I wonder if you could provide a little bit of context for the whole group.
I could. I don't have a huge amount of, other than kind of the ebbs and flows of the urchin fishing model, which is our business, which is why this dock and this lease was created in the first place. And I'm sure folks here could speak a lot better about this. So I don't want to kind of dive into a topic that I don't have all of the background on. So if that's what you were looking for, I can get back to you.
Well, I thought it was part of the rationale for doing a lot of this. In addition to adding slips, it was the changes in the sea urchin fishing businesses.
Oh, I kind of see where you're going with that, but the current license agreement is kind of governed under CUDA, but it doesn't necessarily require them to be urchin fishers. They sort of self-manage that license agreement. So going to commercial fishing slips, it does open the door to a little bit more, to people could fish lobster, other things, and use those slips as they need.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Historically, they were intended for urchin fishing. We, the waterfront, don't even necessarily know if that's 100% the case now, because we don't have a lot of insight as to who is using the slips.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks. Also, another question is, there's 9 boats there currently. Do we expect kind of those 9 boats, for the most part, to apply for these slips?
The intent is that the 9 vessels and vessel owners that are there now will be issued a commercial fishing slip permit. So then they will be beholden to the terms of the commercial fishing policy. So yes, unless one of them voluntarily drops out or does not want that commercial fishing slip permit, I'm assuming all 9 will want that.
Great, thanks. Any other questions from the commission here? Yeah, Commissioner Anderson.
Just one more question on the non-transferable slips. So what are the ways that it would transfer ownership? Is it simply the slip holder relinquishes it, or is it they don't meet the criteria to be a commercial fisherman, and then they have a grace period to get it, and then they don't get it, then it's gone?
Well, there's 2 ways. They can voluntarily kind of divest themselves of it. And so something that the harbor has been criticized for decades is our lack of a wait list, our lack of a way for people to kind of organically obtain slips. If somebody's not meeting the terms of the commercial fishing policy, we will go through a termination process. And so we're all kind of familiar with how that looks. That's our main tool of enforcing it. So if somebody goes the 2-year window, or in this case, we're giving that 6-month grace window for people to kind of catch up and fish. If 6 months from now, or 6 months from when this policy goes into effect, they have not met that $15,000 landing limit, we'll issue a letter. We'll kind of go through that process, and eventually it will come in front of Harbor Commission as in the form of a slip termination. If that slip is terminated, then we'll go to a commercial fishing lottery. So anybody who's interested at that given time, who meets the criteria of having a valid commercial fishing license and has proven that they can catch $15,000 worth of fish in the previous 2 years, can put their name in the hat and potentially be awarded the slip.
And then I know there's been talk before about the $15,000 limit. I think it's been fixed for years. Obviously, if that was to adjust for all the other commercial, that would affect these ones as well.
Yeah,
It's not static.
This is a big effort, and to Commissioner Nelson's point and the folks we've dealt with through this, it's kind of, I see it as a win-win. I mean, it's, there is a growth in our commercial fishing slip pot. It kind of consolidates them into an existing policy, but we're not suggesting dealing with that $15,000 landing limit right now, but that would be something that would be done later in the year if we get to kind of I think it was third on our priority list this year from the settings. So it would kind of having a look at that whole commercial fishing policy in its totality and kind of coming up with the idea of if that landing limit is correct or if there's some changes that need to be made.
Vice Chair Ford, did you have any? Okay. One last question is, after the language is drafted by the Waterfront and City Attorney and it goes to the Ordinance Committee, what's the time frame from after it's passed by Ordinance Committee to when it goes to City Council? Is it a week, a month, 3 months? This process here?
Yeah, we typically try to do that in parallel. It could be a couple weeks after it goes to ordinance.
Okay.
Any ordinance does have sort of a two-time trip to council and a 30-day appeal period. And so there's like 45-ish days kind of baked in there before council, before it officially is approved after council hears it.
Okay, great. And if something happens between then, like after ordinance, what would it, would we be able to, if requested, like, I know that was one of the questions that came up, put that back on the agenda or just simply put it on the consent calendar? I mean, how would that work if that were the case requested?
Yeah, we try and kind of move through these things and gather input, but also try and be sort of efficient and effective with them. And so usually staff makes a determination if there's something that is unclear or some new piece of information. With this, I don't necessarily see that. There's really kind of 3 or 4 governing points that are fairly easy to write into policy. And so we would make a judgment call if it's like, hey, something changed or something came up. We would certainly bring it back to you all, but my intent would be to take this to ordinance and council as is with the language that we're presenting.
Got it, thank you. Any other questions for the waterfront on this item? Okay, we can move on to public comment. I know we have a few speaker slips, so yeah, we'll invite public comment now. Thanks.
We've got 3 speakers in the room and 1 online. First speaker is Harry LaCormick, Chris Voss, Ray Kennedy, and then Tony Luna.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Harry LaCormick, commercial fisherman, commercial urchin diver. I've been fishing out of the harbor almost 40 years now. Began operating boats within 3 years of starting. Operated out of Marina 1 for 16 years. I've been at the Cuda dock for about 20 now. Served as president of CFSB for 12 years. I've been sitting on the Sea Urchin, I still sit on the board, sitting on the Sea Urchin Commission, actually even before it became the Urchin Commission, started in 2005. That organization actually operates under Department of Food and Ag. It's a commodity board. So we have to follow all the hoops and stuff, so I don't know if that was clearly conveyed, the current status of the organization that was overseeing the dock. Anyways, no, I mean, fishing out of this harbor is a pleasure. So when issues come up, you know, we want to know. I think it would have been really helpful to have somebody from the dock speak to the working group there. I see a lot of questions. I'll try and get to them. I think on the broader policy about the exit and entry strategies there, it's a double-edged sword, being able to buy one versus transferring in. At the time of the termination of the policy, the license agreement, we had about 5 guys on the waiting list, not super long. That list has typically been about 5 years. I think I waited about 5 years to go in. If you could pull up the picture of the dock too, I'm going to be going over 2 minutes. I hope you don't, if I'm moving on, move me out of here. But
Yeah, Mr. McCormick, yeah, we'll give you another 2 minutes.
thank you, thank you. Anyway, so traditionally, guys have rotated in onto the inside part of the dock, and then when guys exit out, they can move based on seniority. So I think in the broader sense, with that wait list coming in, you've traditionally have seasoned guys coming in. It's not like you can just come and buy a slip, and that was the impetus of the original commercial fishing policy, was guys could just buy a slip and then not really fished. There were 2 boats that were real questionable fishing boats over in one, or fish float south at one point. That's what kind of pushed that original policy in. It was more of an entry policy, not so much of an exit, but obviously sometimes people have trouble exiting, like your prior waterfront director. He's still lingering. So anyways, what other current things that I think we need to work out still is assignment of the slips, but that's pretty simple. But then the fees, because we've traditionally given the guys on the inside line a break. We've had 2 different tiers because the inside line is really difficult to navigate at low tide. That is actually one of the reasons why that became an erection dock, because our boats traditionally have outdrives. They can be lifted up. You can get in real shallow draft. The boats are small too, so that inside line has a real limitation to it on the boat size and the outside line. So that was one area we didn't really fish. I know you wanted to keep it very simple. Moving into it, I think we do need to meet a little more and kind of discuss that over, because a few guys do have more seniority on the inside. And if you want me to.
Yeah, can you just please, wrap up, just and due to the
Okay.
other public commenters, I think want to make a,
All righty. Yeah, basically slip fees, slip assignments. I do want to state that since 2000, since I've been there, we've had 15 boats turn over. So there's been turnover at that dock, and actually prior to me being there, there was a fair amount of turnover. So the dock has been pretty well managed, I would say, given 37 years we've been there, with the only requirement being a commercial fishing boat. I think we could have really simplified this too, because with respect to the commercial fishing policy, under the previous license agreement, we were never asked, hey, what's your entry and exit strategy? We could have at any point said, hey, you guys need to adopt a policy. And we could have done, we could have made it a lot harder. The current commercial fishing policy is pretty loose. So to me, it's not clear why we were not addressed sooner to make a more formal policy there. We were allowed to operate as is, and I think we did a pretty good job. So with that, do you folks have any questions for me?
thank you, Mr. McCormick. We're all set. We'll move on to the next public speaker.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Stanwyck and Commissioners. My name is Chris Voss, and I'm the current president of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. And I want to start by thanking the department staff and the director, Will Scher, for engaging effectively, I think, with the commercial fishermen on that dock and then working through the challenges. I think one of the issues that's critical is that those slips were never transferable. As Harry pointed out, 13 slips turned over at no cost to those individuals that got those slips. So it was functioning in the same capacity. And so creating this lower barrier to entry for a certain fraction of the commercial fishing slips is a good idea, I believe. And the concern about the larger boats needing those commercial slips to go with them if they sell to an individual that wants to fish out of this port as a unit, that's valuable too. And so to have this mixed dynamic between non-transferable and transferable, and the non-transferable being for smaller slips that in most cases are for trailerable boats, is also a good situation. So I think this was a win-win all the way around, and I think the biggest benefit, as Director Wilshire pointed out, is as representing all the fishermen in the port, this idea that we've lowered the barrier for a fraction of the fleet to get a critical component of what you need to fish out of this harbor, which is a slip. So thank you for all the work that you guys did on this.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. Can we move on to the next public speaker, please?
Good evening, everybody. Ray Kennedy. I'm the Vice President of CFSB and President of CLTFA. And I think that this policy is a step in the right direction. When we go back to Commissioner Nelson's comments, there was 19% of the expansion of the harbor back in 2001 designated to be commercial fishing. That has been ignored for decades now. So we're not necessarily adding slips here. We're just redesignating or classifying them. So we're still looking for those slips. The possibility that someone's going to drop out of that slip and offer it to a newer fisherman through attrition is minimal, And we need some bigger slips because as our fisheries have changed, we're not running 24-foot boats any longer. We're running 35 to 40-foot boats now. So that has not been accommodated, and I would still encourage the Waterfront Department to take a good look at that because that's where we want to go for the future. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
I believe we have one speaker online as well.
Yes, the last speaker is Tony Luna. Tony, I'm going to unmute you, and then you may begin to speak.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. First, I'd like to thank the commission and everybody, specifically Mr. Nelson and Ms. Cohen for representing us commercial fishermen and all of our views and bringing them to the table and everybody. And I would just like to agree with what Ray said and Chris and Harry. And the coup de dock has been there. And my vision is I've been fishing in this harbor commercially for 35 years. And you know, there's 9 slips there. I would say 6 or 7 of those guys are serious commercial fishermen, and they're not going anywhere. So there's very limited turnover in that. There might be 2 or 3 guys that aren't fishing there that may be displaced, and it's a great thing. I think it's a great step in the right direction. My question is, how will you disperse the slips to the fleet? I mean, we talk about new fishers and seasoned veterans. I mean, there's guys like myself that have been there 35 years, and I'm paying up almost $1,000 a month for a visitor slip. Thank you to the Harbor Department and Mr. Wilshire. I know you guys have a tough job, and we've worked it out, but is there any priority that's going to be given to this? And not just with the coup de dock, as additional slips, as we make headway into this problem that we have, I think there should be some sort of a priority system for guys that have maybe been paying in the visitor slip thing, thousands of dollars, a year, might get some priority of a new guy that gets to throw his number in the lottery and get a slip. Again, that's basically my concern, and I thank you all for making a step in the right direction and for all of your hard work.
Great, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, do we have any other public speakers online?
We have no more public speakers at the moment.
Okay. Well, with that, we can invite discussion, or a motion would be in time. Would be in order at this time. And just want to remind everybody that I believe it was, as Commissioner Nelson was saying, a few years ago, the Harbor Commission did vote specifically on creating new fishing slips. And we have a great opportunity here to have 9 new fishing slips. And that is kind of what we had originally voted on and planned on. And so I think this is great that we have this. I know it's a compromise in some ways, but I think it does accomplish the goal. And with that, anybody else have anything to say before we invite a motion?
Yeah, I did have some questions, actually, and I don't know if we're not allowed to ask questions or not, but I didn't get a flavor for, and I apologize, for Mr. LaCormick and for Mr. Kennedy, if they actually want this to be approved.
We have to, wait. We have to direct the questions to the waterfront. Yeah, they're,
I can
Yep.
ask questions
Yeah, not-
to the public?
yeah, we're not, that's part of the subcommittee and work group. Yep. Yep.
Just,
I would be happy to speak to that, though. So
Yeah.
myself and Waterfront staff met with Mr. LaCornick and Bill Hooten and Chris Voss and a few of the folks who spoke here today. I'm going to say at least 3 times over the past 6 or 8 months. This was a product of that, and so all of the people at that table left the room under full agreeance to these terms when we left that room, not once, but twice. And so this was the product of those meetings. If that helps clear it up. I think some of the broader questions are questioning our commercial fishing slip policy. This is sort of one iteration of this license. I know there's been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion over the past few years of reviewing and how that commercial fishing slip policy positively or negatively affects commercial fishermen in the harbor. And I think that is coming. We do need to take a look at that commercial fishing slip policy. To Mr. Luna's points of like a priority and how that would all be somewhere within that commercial fishing slip policy. It is very, very broad and very, very liberal right now with that $15,000 limit. There's a whole number of different things that we could do within that policy to incentivize different groups, incentivize people who are catching more or less. And so that would really be the place for that. This is really just creating 9 commercial fishing slips out of a past license agreement. And so I don't think this is really where we solve that broader discussion on those bigger topics, but that would come sort of down the road when we dig into our commercial fishing slip policy.
I just don't see why I couldn't, I don't see why I can't ask the public a question, but that's okay. I guess I can't.
Yeah, and let me also remind everybody that the dissolution of the commercial fishing work group is not going to happen on the conclusion of this agenda item. That's why it's going to stay open for matters that are continuing on going forward in the future. So, that's what we have going forward.
I'm wondering, John, was your issue about a subsequent review of the documentation answered to your satisfaction?
Thank you. By the way, sorry for, I really couldn't hear him.
No,
really.
I was trying to explain to.
Well, to be candid, I mean, Director Wiltshire's response was, there'll be minor changes to 1720, so it wasn't very specific. And also, in the course of listening to public comment, Mr. LaCornick brought up a point about the inside versus the outside, for example, right? So will that be addressed? It seems that would have to be, a bit of an exceptional policy item. But yeah, to answer your question again, to circle back, it seemed a little vague, right? I think, if we just had those changes in front of us, that I'd feel a little bit more comfortable.
We can definitely bring it back.
Let's make that part of the motion.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, yes, thank you. Thank you.
It is sort of an efficiency thing. So staff does their best
Sure.
job to take all of the priorities that we talked about in January. We only have 10 meetings, and so there's at some point, things like this reach a conclusion and we can move forward on them. And so if we want to kind of slow that down, that's totally fine. We can bring it back as many times as one would need. We're just trying to kind of avoid that situation where we bring a fully baked policy to you that didn't get this portion of the input. And so we're using this to gather that input, and then hopefully there's some trust on staff's part to take what is recommended here and put it into policy and move that forward. But if we want to kind of two-time it going through that process, we can bring it back.
I'm just trying to be sensitive to another comment I heard, and that's that, members of the public felt that they should have been addressed sooner. I'm not sure what that means on the timeline. You're right. You were fully engaged. We held meetings, but I feel like sometimes the working group model, because it's not a subcommittee, it's not noticed, sometimes just kind of operates without a lot of public knowledge of the proceedings. And that's not your responsibility per se. I mean, the three of us sitting on this commission are members of that
But
working group.
in a way, it is staff's responsibility too, and I have pushed back, and we have many past meetings talking about the dynamics of subcommittees and work groups and what can and can't be done there. But the reality is that no action should be taken at work group meetings. No action should be taken by a subset of harbor commissioners. It should be, and staff tries their best to make sure that absolutely happens. And so any action, work groups are really information gathering entities. So they should bring that material back to the entire Harbor Commission. And like we are today, staff is waiting for a vote from all 6 of you tonight, but typically 7 of you, before we take any action. So that is my concern of coming here with a fully baked policy that you all haven't seen, where all harbor commissioners don't have a chance to weigh in on it.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Kidding.
Yeah, do you have a question, Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, I guess, so I serve on the Commercial Fishing Committee, and we did have one meeting on this, maybe 2 meetings, but we did not have interaction with the public on it, and I feel like I have a really hard time pushing a policy forward when I'm really not 100% sure how the public feels about it, and so I'm just voicing my reservations because I'm not able to ask the questions or to the public and be able to understand, that fully. So at any rate. So I guess I'm agreeing with Commissioner Steadman that I feel like that piece of the puzzle for me is not in place.
Okay. Sounds like we have a general agreement. There's a opportunity for a motion. Would anybody like to make the motion, or any member of the commercial fishing work group to make the motion?
I'd be happy to make a motion and entertain a friendly amendment if I get it
Sure.
wrong. I move to convert the California Sea Urchin Commission of Santa Barbara's license space into 9 new designated commercial fishing slip permits, and that the final policy be returned to the Harbor Commission for review and additional public comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
And we have a second by Commissioner Steadman. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Okay. Thank you. We can move to a vote then, Ms. Rodriguez.
Okay, Commissioner Cohen,
I'm going to abstain.
Commissioner Ford,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Steadman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Chair Stanowicz.
Yes.
That's unanimous with 1 abstention and 1 absent commissioner.
Thank you. Okay. We can move on to item number 3 of new business, the waterfront lease guidelines and overview of upcoming leases. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please read the recommendation?
Item number 3,
you.
waterfront lease guidelines and overview of upcoming leases. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a staff report on waterfront lease guidelines and an overview of upcoming leases.
Thank you.
Chair Stanowicz, Commissioners, members of the public, again, my name is Cesar Barrios. I'm the Waterfront Business Manager. And for my next report, I will provide an overview of our policies and processes for developing waterfront leases. Oop. Thank you. Okay, so to provide a little bit of history or background, the Waterfront Department manages a total of 60 leases and license agreements, which include 250,000 square feet of leasable space between the harbor and Stearns Wharf. That also includes water space for some of our leases and licenses within the harbor. Leases fall into 5 primary tenant types, including food service, commercial, office, nonprofit, and other. The Waterfront Department has maintained lease occupancy rates at 100% for over 20 years. That's really good considering the state of other commercial areas within the city of Santa Barbara and the state. In general, the most common way or traditional way for a business to change ownership is via what we call a lease assignment. In this case, the lease or license agreement is acquired via private transaction between the business owner and the new buyer. Through this process, the lease is transferred to the new owner along with all the existing terms, meaning when someone is assigned to a new lease or license, there are no negotiations with the new buyer. The terms completely carry over, including the length of that term and any other details of that lease. In a rare occurrence, a business may close its doors and not meet the requirements of the lease to be renewed. In that instance, the Waterfront Department conducts a public request for proposal, and that's also known as RFP. And that's the process to select a new business to take over that space. So to speak in more detail of the lease assignment process, on this instance, after the outgoing tenant selects a buyer for their business, the Waterfront Department requests a list of documents to vet the new potential owner. Among these documents, we require a sales agreement between the two parties, the buyer's financial statement and tax returns, a credit check from various institutions, and a very detailed business plan of what their financials are and projections for that business moving forward. And also there's a processing fee of $3,000 that is required just for that process. And if the new ownership taking over the business is an LLC or a corporation, we do require a personal guarantee. If all that documentation is sufficient, the lease assignment is then forwarded to the Harbor Commission for review and consideration. And if moved forward, from there the lease is then moves to City Council for approval. And this is a process that you commonly see here. We rarely have any RFPs. The last one, I believe, was the Santa Barbara Landing about 4 years ago. So as I mentioned, on rare occasion, the business does close its doors. The department conducts a public request for proposal. So the RFP in itself includes a description of the lease space, including business terms, proposals of the business, specifically if it's a restaurant or an office or a retail shop. And then we also include the method of how that RFP, that process is going to be handled by city staff and reviewed. So it's a very transparent process. Then when Waterfront Department staff will review all the proposals, ensuring all the requirements have been met. From there, depending on the type of lease and the complexity of the type of business that we're trying to acquire, staff will either review it in-house or convene a group of city staff, Harbor Commission work group, or even a consultant to review and score the proposals. Then the RFP is reviewed by the Harbor Commission. So once we have a selection, we have this review by the Harbor Commission or an established commission work group. Following that step, the Harbor Commission then requests the staff begin the lease negotiations with the selected entity. And once the negotiations are completed and agreed upon, staff returns to the Harbor Commission with the proposed lease agreement for review and recommendation to the City Council. All the proposed lease agreements, regardless of length of term, must be approved by the City Council. Also, I'd like to note that if the lease term is over 5 years, then it requires an ordinance, which adds an additional 30 days of a waiting period before the contract actually takes effect. So in regards to leasing guidelines, the department leases are pursued and negotiated in compliance with the harbor lease policies as outlined in the local coastal plan and the City of Santa Barbara leasing criteria. They must comply with the City Council Resolution 93-127, which was part of your packet. In this resolution, upon completion of the initial lease term or any subsequent lease term options, if the tenant is considered in good standing, they're given reasonable opportunity to discuss and renegotiate that lease as they approach expiration. In the event of a default, as defined within the lease terms, which is included in every lease, just kind of a note on this process that every lease license has a clause stipulating what would be deemed a default within their contract. That would include not paying the rent on time, not paying property taxes. So overall, if the tenant is not in good standing, the city can open up the space and go through this RFP process. So the existing policies continue to provide the primary guidance when developing RFPs and negotiating any type of lease or license. And right here, they're summarized as they appear in the approved local coastal plan is policy number 2.2-18. Furthermore, the City Council Resolution, as I mentioned, 93-127, provides additional guidance on the city policy with respect to renegotiating and renewal of city leases. So these 5 lease policies are summarized in the local coastal plan, as mentioned. I will not go through every single one of them, but I'd like to highlight a couple of them. And one is the section where it says optimum revenue shall be raised to assist in the operation and maintenance of the harbor and to preclude all costs having to be borne by the boating public. In this instance, tenant rents and hourly parking rates are 2 of our sources of income for the Waterfront Department that has available to cover operations and maintenance costs of the harbor. Also, the last section there on the lower right is very unique to Santa Barbara and to the to the waterfront. It's the preclusion of any activity which provides or supplies services tending towards a carnival atmosphere. Unlike our neighboring harbors to the north and to the south, we don't allow that carnival type atmosphere in any of our businesses. So the reason why Santa Barbara does not have the Santa Monica Pier type of feel. So that is very unique, and it's included in all of our leases based on these guidelines. So in addition to reviewing every lease agreement, the Harbor Commission is required by the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to review the extent and nature of uses of the harbor and shoreline area of the harbor commercial zone every 5 years. This effort is to ensure the harbor remains a working harbor. The 5-year review was most recently approved and completed at the Harbor Commission meeting of March 21st, 2024, and subsequently approved by the Planning Commission at their July 18, 2024 meeting. So in the next 5 years, we have 27 leases and licenses up for renewal. As you can see here, 2026 will be a busy year for staff with 14 leases up for renewal. So the goal for us as staff is to engage tenants early on to ensure these lease negotiations start on time and can be efficiently processed. As you can see right here, on average, in the last few years, we've only had 3 to 5 per year. But 2026 will be significantly, we'll be busy. You'll be hearing a lot about these renewals. Either we may engage in an RFP process or just bringing in a renewal with an existing tenant that's in good standing. Overall, we've been fortunate to have tenants that, in the majority, are in good standing. Therefore, that's when you see a lot of these leases being renewed as they meet the requirements and they contribute to the vitality of the harbor. So to conclude, I would like to recap key points of this presentation so that the Harbor Commission reviews every lease or license agreement, that the City Council must approve every lease or license agreement, and per municipal code, the Harbor Commission and Planning Commission conduct a 5-year review of uses. The department's lease development policies and procedures are intended to help to preserve the working harbor well into the future. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Barrios. And also, I know this was one of the top items on our agenda setting meeting in January. So thanks again for putting this on the agenda for today's meeting. Also, just want to point everybody to that chart that was sent out, because I think that's very informative just going forward, because all of those leases in the staff report are going to eventually wind up on the agenda for one of the Harbor Commission meetings going forward to discuss and obviously approve. So thanks for including that as well. With that, do we have any questions? Commissioner Nelson.
Yes, I want to first reference the fact that the strategic plan that we have been talking about and will continue to talk about will have some input on the direction that we would like to see in terms of programming, in terms of leases, in terms of activities. And so at that time, we would have a basis arguably to object or to recommend that an RFP be conducted. But as practice has been for, I guess, a couple of decades, the decision to seek a new activity, the decision to do a ocean-related use as opposed to an ocean-dependent use as opposed to an ocean-related use as opposed to a visitor use, that decision is largely made by the existing tenant, not by the Harbor Commission. Typically, it comes to us with a recommendation to approve it. Largely, I think, as this question that I raised with Brian Bossy when he had your job, Caesar, because of this 93-127 guidance. And I asked him to have a city council opinion letter on that, which his response was, they won't give you an opinion letter on that because it's simply guidance. It's not really, it's not law, ordinance, or regulation. It's just guidance. Because what I read was the provision that says that the city of Santa Barbara wants to be an exemplary landlord and may do the following. A, giving the city tenants who are in good standing a reasonable opportunity to discuss and negotiate. B, reviewing and considering unsolicited lease proposals. C, actively soliciting lease proposals from a wide spectrum of the local community, blah, blah, blah. Now, Brian's interpretation of that is if the existing tenant wants to stay, you don't get to go to B. You don't get to consider an unsolicited proposal. You don't get to consider whether or not to do an RFP. And I said, that's not what's in this document. Can we get some reading on that? Because part of me is that we would want to do that if we said the primary use as a harbor commission, the local coastal plan says that we are the ones that take a look at whether balance is being achieved between the primary use, which is ocean dependent, the secondary use, which is related, and then the third, the visitor serving. So if we, after doing our strategic planning process, decided that we would like to do more of the primary uses, ocean dependent, then we would have, arguably, we would have to say to an existing tenant, this is the direction we would like to go with this public property. Would you like to bid on it? We're going to put it out to RFP. The bossy interpretation is you never get to do that. You basically, if they're paying the rent and they meet all the 10, 5, or 6 things that they do there, we have to assign the lease to them or renew the lease to them. And that's, to me, that's a problem. And that's just my comment and observation. It would be great if the city council and/or city attorney could weigh in on that. And because I also know that they have ignored or gone beyond this policy twice in the last 2 or 3 years. Once, the Cabrillo Pavilion on the beach by Parks and Recreation, they had an existing tenant, but they decided, given the capital investment that they were making in that facility, that they really ought to try to go for a different type of tenant and clientele, and the existing tenant was allowed to participate. And now they have a new lease, which is making them more revenues than they have in a long time. The city council recently approved a lease for what was the Metropolitan Theater. They just approved, they did not continue with the lease to Metropolitan, and they approved the lease to the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. So there has been recent transactions that essentially says that we can do other things than simply renew the existing lease to the existing tenant. So I would hope that we would be open to that, particularly given the fact that there are instances, recent instances, that have done what is the goal of whether it's 93, 127, or the local coastal plan. It's the maximum public benefit and revenue. And I think to be able to do that, we can't simply leave all the decisions up to the existing tenant. And I'm hoping that when we come up with a strategic plan, we'll have some guidance to suggest to the Harbor Commission that we not renew a lease. But we've got to get over this old policy.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and also too, just with that, I think that one of the issues is, in my opinion, looking at a lot of the leases, there just hasn't really been ones where there's been big issues. But I guess now that we have the list of all the upcoming ones,
Right.
and we have a strategic planning work group, the work group can kind of pinpoint those and kind of communicate during their meetings with the waterfront. I think that's a good idea.
That's what I'm saying, is
Yep.
that I hope that we realize that because Director Wilshire has said to me on a number of occasions, will you have the ability to say, no, you don't have to approve that lease? And you're right, we don't, but I'd like to have a basis and a good reason, and that's what the strategic planning process would provide us, so.
Yep, and I know we get a work group update pretty much every month, and so that would be a perfect time, I think, to kind of alert the commission of a specific item or lease. So yeah, I think everybody would benefit from that. Yep. And also one question for the waterfront. I know you said there are certain leases that are coming up for RFP, and we used to have a whole RFP work group. Just going forward, how would that work? I mean, could we, instead of starting a new work group or subcommittee, I mean, could they utilize strategic planning and say, hey, they can be kind of like a pseudo RFP type of work group in that sense?
Chair Stan, it's a good question. RFPs are rare.
Yeah.
We have tenants that rarely turn over. But when they do, like especially depending on the size, you know, if it's a 180 square foot office for a few $100 a month, maybe we don't need a full staff review. But if it's something like Santa Barbara Landing, we assemble like a team of staff managers. We'd have a Harbor Commission RFP process, and it would be a much more involved. And so I think the RFP work group is a really good thing to stand up for individual RFPs, as long as kind of once that RFP process is done, that work group is disbanded, and then we can kind of revive one again once we have an RFP in the making. So I think that would be a good way to go
Okay.
for RFPs in the future.
All right.
And the RFP, I was on, Merritt and I were on the last standing RFP subcommittee. And one of the issues that we raised at the time is the RFP process essentially is concluded, and we get the recommendations of the procurement. And and we either vote them up or vote them down. And one of the things that we have wanted to consider pursuing was that we be involved in the entire process with the development of the RFP, as well as the concluding vote, if you will, for the selected operator. So.
Okay. Thanks. And one other question I have is, you know, when I was attending some of these other commissions, like Parks and Rec or Historical Landmarks, they had, when there was a issue or a permit up, they would usually have the person applying be at the meetings for Q&A with representation too. If there's questions from the commission on a specific lease, can we request representation from the person or the company whose lease we are approving for Q&A at a Harbor Commission meeting if there's a big lease up or there's a big issue with it or something? How does that process work?
I'll speak to it as much as I know and get some attorney follow-up.
Yeah.
But these leases are with city council. And so it's common, not common, but for city council to have a closed session on lease things that aren't necessarily to be aired out in public, where you're kind of ironing out those terms. I don't know if that is Harbor Commission or other commissions' roles, because the lease doesn't ultimately lie with Harbor Commission. It is a lease with city council.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, I know that happens with council from time to time, but I don't think it happens with that sort of like appeal closed session type thing with Harbor Commission, where there's like direct interaction with leaseholders, because the Harbor Commission is advisory, and so there's usually typically an expectation of an outcome at those, and the outcome would be driven by city council.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification. Any other questions from the commission regarding lease practices? Oh, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. I hate to put you on the spot, this may be more of a finance working group question, but do you know the square footage and rental income we have from the for-profit side of things? Like the first numbers is obviously includes a lot of nonprofit. Do we know kind of, what I'm trying to get at, what is it we're getting per square foot from the for-profit side of things?
It really varies. So as Mr. Barrios mentioned, we have kind of 4 or 5 major categories. It's like office, food service. All of those leases are different. So myself, Caesar, long before us, the majority of these leases are inherited. Some of them are based on percentage rent, so you can't really have a square footage calculation there, because if they're doing really well, then they're paying a lot per square foot. If they're doing poorly, they're paying very little per square foot. We can standardize that on office spaces and spaces that are just flat base rent. And that's certainly something that we can kind of present going forward, or present to the strategic working group and kind of look into those.
Yeah.
We have in the past worked with local consultants to kind of get an idea of what market rates are, and it's just such a unique place down here in these kind of one-off leases where there's a big food service tenant paying a percentage rent on an older lease. And so, sorry, I don't have like a specific dollar per square foot, because it really varies across business type.
The 3-year average is nice to see, but maybe when we get into the not subcommittee, but the working group, it'd be nice to maybe drill down on that. And then similarly themed, do we have, maybe similar answer, but in terms of the cost, like, are most of our leases, are they triple net where the tenants are paying for the utilities and the trash and all that, or do we cover that? Is there a general theme on that, or again, does it vary?
Again, it's a mix. Typically, the tenants who are in a standalone building, a lot of the times that they are basically triple net, and they're responsible for the majority of their building. A tenant that operates out of kind of a shared space, so you look at kind of Harbor Way or the Maritime Museum building, it's like multiple tenants in one building. Those are usually broken out a little bit differently, where we are on the hook for the waterfront's on the hook for a lot more of the maintenance, and they may pay into like a common area maintenance charge as opposed to the building being entirely their responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stedman?
Yes, thank you. Question for Waterfront. What are the rules on a sublease? For example, the chandlery, right? What if some admiralty lawyer, offers to take up a seat in that office because it's related and it would improve the efficiency of that business? Or, marine insurance guy says, hey, Mr. Keating, can you rent me a desk? Do we have rules that govern that?
Commissioner Stedman, we do. So the majority of releases do not allow for subleasing of their space. However, for the example you used for a yacht broker, they can have a licensed broker work within their license or the umbrella of their business and operate from that space. And then they have their internal arrangements on financials, but that's a possibility. On the other side, if you have like a retail shop that wants to sublease to a different business to have a small little corner, that is not generally allowed. We haven't explored that. It hasn't been really been a priority.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
I know it's pretty infrequent that a space does become vacant. Do you just put that on a website, or do you use a brokerage company when you do that? How is it advertised?
It's a good question. Again, it kind of depends on the scale. And so the last big one, like Santa Barbara Landing or something like that, we advertised it nationally, used multiple services, like long amount of time. Something for an office space, we do keep a list of interested parties who want a lease space, and so we'll reach out to all of them. We'll kind of advertise it as broadly as we can through local sources, and then a lot of other maritime sources, or depending on kind of what that space is utilized for, we try and kind of market it towards the largest audience possible.
Do you work with brokers in offering them a commission if they find a space, or is that not something that the city does?
We haven't in the past, in my tenure here.
Is it something that has been considered, or is there a reason that it hasn't been?
It hasn't been necessary at the waterfront up until this point, because the RFPs have been kind of successfully sought after. I mean, the demand was there, and so they met the terms and paid the rate, and so it hasn't been, we haven't been in a position where we have been actively needing to seek tenants when we go to an RFP.
Okay. I'm just wondering then, so when, if there's always people that will take it, maybe do you feel like you're always getting the maximum, when a space is vacant, the maximum value on the new lease?
No, I don't, because we're not necessarily trying to do that. So we kind of look at it like, if we were truly chasing the maximum dollar, our business mix would likely change. And so we do often prioritize nonprofits, we prioritize ocean dependent, and those entities aren't necessarily going to be paying the highest and best value for those spaces.
Sure.
So we will likely have an office space coming up in the near future, and it's very likely that we, the Waterfront and Harbor Commission, would align and recommend that if we get 10 applicants and there are some of them that are ocean dependent, it's pretty likely that we're not going to try and charge maximum rent to those folks, because that's just not what they're capable of paying.
Then how would you decide, I'm sorry, who receives, if you have 10 applicants, how do you decide that?
That's how we go through that RFP process. So the local coastal plan guides us almost to a T that we need to prioritize ocean dependent. We look at our mix as to what yourselves and Planning Commission recommended, that our current mix is correct. So if an ocean dependent use is leaving, and then we try and fill that with another ocean dependent use. It's not necessarily about the striving for the highest dollar.
I understand that, and I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm, trying to, but I do feel like it's really hard when you're picking and choosing who the winners are if there are multiple ocean-dependent uses or people that can use it versus like the person that maybe, has the ability to pay more. But at any rate, I've
No,
learned
that's
something.
very true. I mean, if we just kind of chase that all the way down to the bottom, then we would be going after the highest value tenants, which are not necessarily ocean-dependent tenants. But that's where we lean on a RFP work group, a harbor commission. I mean, getting multiple applicants for an RFP is a great position to be in one. Can only one person succeed and win that RFP? Yes. And so there has to be a decision-making process that happens at staff level, harbor commission level, city council level, but eventually at the end of the day, an entity is chosen. And it can be weighted based on rents, or it can be weighted on how they contribute to the waterfront, or if they're ocean dependent, or, so all that can be weighed in.
Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Nelson, do you have another comment?
But wouldn't you agree that it would be helpful, I recognize and agree with you, that we would prioritize the ocean-dependent use, but it would be good to know how much of a discount we're providing ocean-dependent use as opposed to an ocean-related use. And the only way that I can come up with, and I don't know if there are real estate companies in town that may be able to do it better, is to have some kind of market valuation of the property. And then we can make a decision. If we know that the market value hypothetically is $10 a square foot, but the Chamber of Commerce can only pay $5, then that's a decision we have to make to give up market value. Because I disagree. I think some of the slides that we've shown us of the well, I know it's in the this policy says you have the obligation to achieve maximum possible public benefit and financial return. So how can you possibly answer that question unless you know what the market value of those 60 properties are? And then you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to do ocean-related or you want to do visitor serving. But at least you start knowing the value of the public real estate that we're making available. And I'm sure there are appraisers in town that do that kind of stuff. And if we did it once every 5 years or so, I don't know, at least we would know. I mean, it's one thing to say, we've got 100% lease, we've got 100% occupancy. Well, of course you do if it's controlled by the existing tenant and you don't know what the value is. I just think we need to just take a look at it. I'm not saying we do it wrong. I voted for sending it on to the Planning Commission, but I don't think it's that sophisticated to get market value. And I think if you ask the State Lands Commission, would that be a good idea? I think they might say so as well.
Thanks, Commissioner Nelson. Any other comments regarding the leases? Great. Thank you guys for the presentation. We can move on to item number 4, the review of proposed waterfront capital project for fiscal year 26-27. Ms. Rodriguez, can you please read the recommendation?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a presentation on the Waterfront Department's proposal for fiscal year 2026 and 2027 capital improvement projects. Discuss and recommend staff include the list of capital improvement projects as part of the fiscal year 2026 and 2027 budget submittal to council.
Thank you.
Hello, Chair, Commissioners, and the general public. My name is Brian Adair, Facilities Manager at the Waterfront. This evening, I'd like to talk about capital projects for fiscal year 2026 and 2027. There's a lot of information on this table, but just want to point out two things. You can see fiscal year 26 and 27. And then at the bottom, you see a budget of $2.4 million and $2 million. So basically, we're trying to stay within $2 million to $2.5 million per year. I will review some key projects. This one is our annual Stearns Wharf heavy timber project. Stearns Wharf is massive, and it does take a lot of maintenance and care to continue being our #1 tourist attraction. So we $600,000 for 26 and $650 for 2027. Objectives again is to replace aging piles, caps, stringers, and deck boards. Another project we've been talking about is the accessibility improvement along Harbor Way. We have extreme congestion in this area, and we're really concerned about pedestrian safety. So with this project, we want to improve safety, accessibility, traffic flow, and customer experience. It's hard to see there, but that big building is the Coast Guard building. It's outlined in blue. It shows a sidewalk that we're going to try to create a main thoroughfare for pedestrians to not intermingle with the heavy traffic. This current year, we are trying to get consultants aboard and do the design, conceptual drawing, and permitting. And this budget is for fiscal year 2026 to actually do the construction. Something else that we traditionally do here at the waterfront is that we have an annual waterfront minor projects budget. So 2026 is $250,000, 2027 is $250,000. These projects is to replace and upgrade aging asset components such as replacing doors and windows, sidewalks, water heaters, air handlers, fixing the docks, replacing plumbing, and painting the buildings. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to do scheduled and unscheduled deferred maintenance. The next project I'd like to share with you is Mr. Wiltshire is really campaigning to help us find a way to replace Marinas 2, 3, and 4. At the end of Marina 1, our fingers Q, R, and S. When Marina 1 was replaced, those three fingers were in addition to the marina, as I understand, so they weren't as old as the original Marina 1. So we're trying to get some more life out of them. But right now we'd like some funding to do master planning, to do a conceptual design, work with consultants, engineers, and hopefully obtain maybe a building permit. Then we'll go out to bid. Another big asset that we have that needs continuous maintenance is our parking lots. So every year we allocate a certain amount of dollars, typically $100,000 to $150,000, to refresh the parking lots for patching, crack sealing, slurry sealing, and restriping. Another big project that we'd like to do is to expand our mooring field off of East Beach. And these will be city-owned moorings that we would lease out. Another ongoing effort is to continuously upgrade our public restrooms for ADA compliance and for public use. Up there it says 25 and 26. That is incorrect. It's fiscal year 26 and 27. The next target in 2025 is to focus on the foot of the wharf restroom, public restroom. And then maybe in 2027, it'll be Ledbetter, go back to the Ledbetter restroom. We like to keep our building shells in good standing. One is replacing roofs. So for 2026, we like to replace broken clay tiles on the Waterfront Center. And then on the north and south side, there are flat tar roofs that will need attention in 2027. The parking department, with the help of Nicole Telez and Cesar Barrios, they're looking at ways to improve, to maintain and improve our parking systems and to make it more convenient and more reliable for our customers. So in 2026, we'll continue replacing a portion of the parking ticket machines, hardware, and then they're looking at ways to transition to a new system that will be paperless and use cell phones. This is going back to the master list, and you're welcome to take time to look at the line items to see if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Adair. Yeah, thanks for providing all those capital projects and kind of the transparency behind that. And I know also too, that is going to be probably discussed during the budget work group coming up in the next few months. So with that, we'll take questions. And it looks like Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you for the report. Appreciate it. On the idea of going back to the Ledbetter bathroom, I'm just wondering if there's been, I don't know, maybe that's not part of this, but is there a plan to engage with the public to make sure that, you know, their feedback is integrated into it on the second round? And would that also involve increasing the budget? Because I know that when we were talking about it last time, there was going to be, in order to do some of those, you know, address some of those concerns, we were going to need to maybe go to Coastal Commission, maybe, you know, increase the budget.
We would like to do something in the fiscal year 2027. It's kind of far out there. We did a lot of outreach when we went through the first effort, and then we just couldn't please everybody, so we decided to put it off to the side and come back to it. So we would like to come back in 2027 and do all those things that you had recommended. As far as increasing the budget, we would like to spread out our funding to several bathrooms. If we put all of our money in one pot, it may not be the best use of our funds. So if we do go back to it, we're going to try to just do a refresh on the inside and not try to do the outside inside and try to meet everybody's needs and demands. But we do need that. We would like to make it more presentable to everybody that uses it. So we'll try to find a way to make our dollars stretch and be successful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nelson?
To follow up on Commissioner Cohen's question, we always see 2 years, 2006, 2027, but I'm thinking about 2025 and 2024. Do you maintain a list that goes back 5 years? So for example, one of the things that I'm thinking about is we now know that the Coastal Commission is funding waterfront projects with Coastal Commission funds. So therefore, when I know in years past, there was one that said sea level rise, and I think it was a couple $100,000, maybe $100,000. Is that money still there? Or do we get all the old projects disappear and the only thing we should focus on is 6 and 7?
No, good question. I mean, the tough thing with capital projects, it's not always so discrete per year. So yes, we're definitely still working on projects that were funded in 24 and 25. That specific sea level rise item, no, we didn't actively use those funds, and they rolled back into our kind of capital budget, mainly because the city successfully obtained that $1.3 million grant that you spoke about earlier.
Right.
And so prior to that grant, each department was kind of trying to grapple with how we're going to start planning for it.
But you make a decision on elimination or deletion of old projects that weren't designated specifically, that were placeholders. So you had money in the previous year's budgets for like sustainability projects, and you had the sea level rise projects. So I'm wondering what happens to that money. And I think what you're saying is that if we don't do anything in that 2-year cycle, we just put it back into.
And sort of, we have to actively request to roll projects over to council. And so there's like a financial process there that can happen at either quarterly intervals or typically as a budget cycle. And so if there's a project like the ice house that we wanted to continually roll over and say, hey, no, we still want to put those funds to use, we make that request to council as a part of our budget.
Because it would be good, because maybe I should make this motion when we have communications with staff. Because I think that there should have been more coordination. I mean, I know our Harbor Commission, and we have been, projects that I've been associated with, the Commercial Fisheries Work Group, I have no problems. I'm not being critical. But the point is that the charter for the Harbor Commission says that all matters pertaining to the waterfront we're supposed to weigh in on. And my argument is that that project, which is doing a survey of what the citizens in the community want from their waterfront, is something that we should at least be aware of or have been involved in. And when I look at what Morro Bay did, they actually funded not only the sea level rise adaptation process, but they also figured out a way to come up with strategic planning or a master plan for their harbor. We decided not to do that, and I'm assuming there are really good reasons for that. But I think we ought to be asking the Sustainability Department, why didn't you do that? Or would you be willing to adjust your process to do that? And if not, then we would say, well, because the sea level rise money we budgeted before was specific for that purpose, and you could have asked for it, then we could free up that money to do the harbor master planning or strategic planning process. That's what I'm trying to find money for what we want to do with commitments that have already been made, not hurting your operating budget in 2006 and 7. But if there's 2005 money and we're not getting the kind of cooperation we need, then, you know.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And Brian had asked me 2 weeks ago, how broad should this be? And my recommendation to him was, we do all that. I think within the last few months, Brian gave a pretty thorough review of our existing capital project. This is, the intent of this is really the kickoff. So each department is saying, here's our next 2 years. This is a part of the budget process. Specifically with the sea level rise adaptation plan, just a reminder that we had them speak to the Harbor Commission in November about the complete scope of what that funding was being used for. They were asking your recommendations. There was a pretty thorough discussion just a few months ago on that, and so that sort of helped them direct where this was all going. And they got that direction from a lot of different groups, because that money is not specific to the waterfront. It's wastewater, public works, El Estero, all of these departments that they're trying to work cross-departmentally with that have a whole bunch of commissions. And so they kind of took that on the road show.
I don't want to be critical. I mean, our relationships with cities is solid, but there seems to be an opportunity missed. If other waterfronts all up and down the coast are using Coastal Commission local project money for legitimate projects like Suzanne's talking about and what we're talking about with strategic planning process, then we ought to be creative and say, to go back to them, because at least the press release that I read said it was a multi-year project. And Morro Bay's been back 2 or 3 times to the same capital project funding from the Coastal Commission. So if not, if they don't want to, I mean, if they want to work with us, great. But if they don't, then maybe we should do it ourselves. Or
we have a very organized entity in sustainability and resilience, and they are actively chasing those grants. And it's not a situation where that ship has sailed and it's over. This is kind of an iterative and continuous process. But these would have been the exact types of discussions to have in November when they were here, and we'd be happy to kind of bring them back at iterative intervals on how that money's being spent and what else we can go after and how they can kind of improve the dollars, because the intent is to use that
Well,
1.3 million as planning.
That's exactly what I'm trying to suggest that we do. Either they come back, or you at least have a conversation with them.
We are. I was in a meeting, an hour meeting today.
Because there's money there that other harbors are using that we could take advantage of. And it's better if the city operates in a unified, force when it goes to the Coastal Commission or the Coastal Conservancy.
No, I can assure you that is what's happening, and that's what makes it difficult to kind of have each individual entity like us, the waterfront,
Right.
drive the ship. And so the city's made a decision to handle that at a consolidated level through sustainability and resilience, which I firmly agree with. I think it's great to have them because it is very multi-departmental. And I was in a meeting this afternoon talking about how this grant funding for design and planning is going to hopefully lead to physical funding for construction and implementation, kind of all the next steps with that.
Okay, thanks.
Vice Chair Ford?
Thanks. As the newest member of the commission, I am assuming that the accessibility improvements line item is a new one. You haven't had something like this before, and I'm really in favor of it. We have so many children and families, and that area is sort of a total free-for-all. So I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about what you're hoping to accomplish with a walkway, or what it might look like. What's your dream?
Again, it's hard to see, but basically, we're fighting, one of the things that we're fighting against is that we cannot give up coastal parking. So we're very limited on what we can do, but we know this is...
Can you change coastal parking, though?
Not yet, but to make, it's a give and take scenario. If we want to take parking space away to create something else, then that becomes a complication, that becomes a roadblock, a hurdle. So what we did, we want to create the walkway, which is that dotted blue line that goes from the Santa Barbara Fish Market all the way out to the intersection where Harbor Way is. So and we'll do the best we can to create a clear line of vision. So when people come around the corner from the fish market, they can see exactly where to go. Right now, the only thing they see is, hey, I got to walk in the roadway, and that's what we cringe and wish to change as soon as possible. So after creating this walkway, those cars that you see along that blue walkway, that will be parallel parking to give us more space for a wider sidewalk to encourage people to go that way rather than a wider street. So, giving up coastal
Parallel parking on both sides? Sorry for interrupting. Or on just the one side?
Just the one side,
Okay.
yeah. So we've, in fiscal year 2025, we've have an agreement with Flowers and Associate. They're a civil engineering firm that's going to help us lay this whole thing out. So we have an idea, a dream, a need, a desire. We have the money. Now we just got to put the plan together and then go through city planning and permitting process to get it approved. So we're gearing up for all those steps and hopefully be successful. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Commissioner Stedman?
Yes, thank you. Brian, in that last image, you're diverting the future path to the west of the Coast Guard building. And I remember about a year ago when Commissioner McCrae took it upon himself to sit in the corridor there to the east of the Coast Guard building, wondering what you've done to study diverting the path to that side of the building.
Mayor McCrae did a study, but he realized that you can't, it's very difficult to guide people, and that corridor is a valuable space. Some people use it, but some people feel uncomfortable using it. People are lazy. They go from what they see, where they want to go, point A to point B. So from McRae's evaluation, and he realized that no matter what you do, people are going to go where they want to go. Even though we can recommend and guide them to a safer location, they're just not going to do it, as a group of people, unless we put up some sort of fencing and gate and really corral them and move them in the right direction. But going back to the facilities master plan, I think we could look at the big picture and really try to make some heavy decisions and make some heavy improvements. What's important, what's not so important. We've been talking about all the tenants and the spaces that they use. How can we move the pieces around to make these improvements? But there are some restricting factors. Parking is one. Infrastructure. It's very expensive to move infrastructure. So this is something we've been toiling with, and this is a first step to relieve the pressure of what we see today. It may not be the final answer, but it's going to be something to get us down the road.
Thank you. And then one last question for Director Wiltshire. So the last meeting of Harbor Commission, you mentioned contacting Commissioner, or not, City Council woman Megan Harmon, because she's also on the Coastal Commission, to maybe present to us. And I'm reminded of that because we've, bantied about that term a lot in this meeting. So just wondering if we can ask her.
Yeah, it's great. And again, I keep trying to rely on that priority setting workshop on where we chose outside guests, but
it's totally ad hoc. Yeah. I get it.
No, I know, and it's just I know it's staff's job to build these future agendas and calendars, and they get really full, to be honest. And so yeah, absolutely.
Totally, I get it.
Note taken.
Thanks. Question. Commissioner Cohen?
I just was wondering, on accessibility, because I agree with Commissioner Ford that accessibility is a big issue. If there's ever been an audit of the harbor with regards to, areas that need improvement for those within our community that, need more, safety.
There was a study of the ADA transition plan. I can't remember if it was from the 90s or early 2000s. That plan has some valuable information in it, but we've been thinking about renewing that ADA transition plan to help us reprioritize where we need to focus first.
And additionally, when individual projects occur, it's law to bring them up to ADA compliance, and so that's a big part of when our tenants do renovations and when we renovate any space. Even just paving a parking lot and restriping it, ADA codes change relatively quickly, and so every time we do a project, a significant portion of the cost goes to accessibility upgrades.
Sure. It would be good to, if there was a comprehensive study to understand what areas would be maybe most impactful for that community. And I certainly would support that.
No, there has been. We have that, and it guides when we go into a project. A lot of projects because the code changes so quickly, we have gotten into the practice of hiring a CASP, a certified access specialist. And so they come in and kind of review your project site and let you know what is out of compliance and what the priorities would be for those zones. Typically, the outcome of those reports is that the dollars that are required to come up to compliance are astronomical. And so you really have to kind of chip away at these over time.
Commissioner Nelson?
I run the risk of Director Wiltshire not ever speaking openly to me again, but I remember you saying that our parking lots are not perhaps as full as we would like them to be. And I'm wondering if we ever take a look at our parking lots in terms of the performance of those lots and what lots are performing and what lots aren't performing, because technically they could provide space that we could pursue projects that could generate revenue. generate revenues or be ocean-dependent uses, so that kind of thing. So if in fact there has been a decline in the usage of our parking lots, could we kind of take a look at that and see where the problem is the greatest or the worst?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we review our parking's great. It's one of the resources that we have pretty granular data on almost on a daily basis. The demand for parking has not been going down.
Right.
It's going the other way. Does that mean that some lots are not fully occupied at a portion of the times? For sure. But I wouldn't say that parking is always a constant issue anywhere you go. And so trying to take it away is almost impossible. Something that is happening in the near future is we are embarking on essentially a parking and traffic study for the entire waterfront department. Every time a project proposes a change of use, coastal development permit, and the Planning Commission requires some sort of parking analysis. So it's always a big impediment for our tenants. So myself and Mr. Barrios and our Public Works and Transportation Department are working on putting that together to just do it for the waterfront in its entirety so that all of our tenants can utilize that data as opposed to doing it on a one-off basis when they're required to. So our hope is that within the next kind of 6 months or year, we'll have a more modern analysis of the parking demand down at the waterfront.
Great.
Commissioner Anderson?
Sticking on the parking theme here, I forget, have you all discussed, are you all, as the city, taken a position on the AB 2097 rule that says if you're within a half a mile of major transportation hub, parking requirements are basically no longer in effect? Because I wasn't sure if that was just for private or if it's public as well. And I know the Coastal Commission has pushed back on that one because they obviously want to keep as much parking as they can near the water, but in an instance like this, it may be beneficial for you all to have an opinion on that and say, we're taking the state's lead on this one, and if we want to remove 6 parking spots to increase accessibility, maybe that's the avenue that would be beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the city of Santa Barbara, we work together on sort of a legislative platform to take a city stance on that sort of thing. I'll follow up with the person in the city who essentially kind of manages that legislative platform and see if, because the tricky part is sometimes what may align for the waterfront or harbor may not necessarily be in agreement with what the city is looking at. So just trying to make sure that we respond from the city's point of view and council's point of view, but I'll follow up on that. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. One of the questions I have is, and I'm glad Mr. Adair showed the minor projects budget, because being in the harbor all the time, one of the questions I always get from people are about those minor issues and things. And I was just kind of wondering, how are the funds dispersed from those things? Somebody calls up, shower's not working in Marina One bathroom, how does something like that go about? And can you guys disperse those funds right away, or does it have to go through any process? Or, just kind of curious about those kind of items.
If it's a small dollar amount, $2,000 to $10,000, I'll just use my maintenance operational budget. But if it's $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 to replace some sort of capital asset, then I'll use this annual waterfront minor projects thing. But before every year, I propose a long list of wish list items that we would like to use this money for, and it always exceeds it. So I consider it deferred maintenance. And if something breaks down, then we put it up higher on the priority list. But every year, we've got a long list of things that we would like to do, and we keep picking away at it. And it's really helpful to have these funds. But what I've learned that even if a project is small or either large, all the steps usually take, the steps are usually very long. So these type of projects are very small, but a lot of quantity. So it's hard to get through them, but we've been pretty successful the last 3-4 years. And we're very thankful to have this money to utilize to keep picking away to make these improvements.
Great, thank you. Okay, does anybody have any other questions regarding the waterfront capital projects? All right, thank you, Mr. Adair. Yeah, looking forward to discussing more on the budget in the next few months. So, thank you. Oh, that's right. That's right. Before we move on, this item does require a motion. Part of the recommendation was to recommend that staff include this in the budget going forward. So before we move on, yeah, thank you, Vice Chair, for the reminder. Do we have a motion to recommend that we move forward with these capital projects?
So move.
We have a
Second.
motion and a
Second.
second. Thank you. Ms. Rodriguez, yeah, we'll take a vote. Thank you.
Commissioner Ford?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stedman?
Yes?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Chair Stanowicz?
Yes,
That's unanimous with Commissioner McCray absent.
thank you. Okay, we can move on now to the department update part of the agenda. Item number 5, the director's report.
All right, thank you, Commission. This part should be fairly quick. Next slide. Yeah, I just wanted to take an opportunity to share some information on something that I was lucky enough to attend just a couple weeks ago. So the National Working Waterfront Conference was held February 4th to 6th down in San Diego, and I was able to attend for all 3 days. I wasn't alone. We had our Harbor Commissioner Mike Nelson was there, Chris Voss with CFSB, and Kim Selko with CFSB, so got to overlap with them a fair amount and strategize on what seminars and panels we all wanted to attend. So in addition to our Santa Barbara folks, I guess there were probably 200 plus attendees, and these were really professionals and folks that work in harbors around the nation. I was pretty impressed with how many folks came over from the East Coast. So it was nice to kind of hear how they do business over there and how ports operate. And so up there as well, I did include a link to the National Working Waterfronts website. It's really a unique organization, so made up of people that are kind of involved in working waterfronts around the nation. It's not overly formal. There's no sort of formal membership. They're just kind of reaching out to as broad of an audience as they can. The kind of background diversity at this conference was really unique. There weren't a huge amount of people from kind of the municipal side, but it was really interesting to kind of see the different takes and people from regulatory agencies, environmental agencies, other ports. Obviously being in San Diego, there's a fairly big San Diego presence. Next slide. A couple of the major topics that were covered, disaster response, climate change, workforce development, planning and policy, infrastructure, and waterfront culture and heritage. And there were just a vast number of speakers on all of these topics. Next slide. So just speaking for myself and some of my takeaways, and I also reached out to CFSB and Commissioner Nelson to just kind of see what some of their takeaways were, because we all sort of got to go down different paths and meet with other folks. But some of my major takeaways, there's just a lot of similar issues facing harbors across the nation, not only on the West Coast. It's really clear how different ports and harbors are. I kept hearing the saying, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. I think that came up in like 5 or 6 different panels, but the issues were very, very similar. And the ones that really stood out to me are what we've kind of been talking about. How do you prioritize ocean-dependent and working waterfront uses over higher-paying uses? Essentially, every port in the nation is struggling with housing costs, with increasing rent, with lack of availability of space for infrastructure, and so just hearing different folks and how they navigate that. So sat in on a great presentation from the Coastal Conservancy and got to actually speak with their representative there after for a little while, just kind of picking her brain on how to best go after this Coastal Conservancy funding. They are a really big entity that provides funding to ports, and Commissioner Nelson mentioned some projects to the north of us, and the Coastal Conservancy is the group that funds those. Behind the scenes, it seemed like there was a little bit of concern with kind of their funding going towards LA with the wildfires and where that funding is going to get pulled, and so they didn't seem overly optimistic in the coming years with availability of huge amounts of funding, but still kind of going after it and pitching our case. And then something else that stuck out is just really the need to market ourselves as a working harbor. So we kind of live it and talk it every day, but the community of Santa Barbara may not even know that or see the value in it. And so this idea of openly marketing the value of having a working harbor as opposed to not. And so a lot of the things that come from a working harbor and the mix that we have, there's kind of this intrinsic value there. You may not see that in direct rents or money to the department, but there is this intrinsic value. And so it becomes kind of our job to market that to the public and community so that we can hold on to that heritage and the value there. And then ultimately just establish a lot of contacts with various harbors. So talked with a couple other harbor masters and some other ports and just issues they were dealing with. Talked with a lot of people from grant agencies, Sea Grant, that sort of thing. And ultimately got a boat tour out of the deal of Port of San Diego, which is like, it just really puts things into scale, how much larger and kind of different that port is compared to here. So that was all I had on that conference. Just felt really kind of lucky to attend it and get some time hearing from some folks that we don't usually get to hear from. So happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Director Wilshire.
There might have been a public comment on
Yeah, I believe that we do have one public comment speaker slip. Yeah, we'll take that now before we go to questions.
Mr. Chris Voss, you've got 2 minutes.
Mr. Voss.
Chair Stanwyck, Commissioners, I just want to briefly speak to the benefit I got from that experience in San Diego. We are working in collaboration with SBCC on an ocean collective concept. And what I found there were a lot of similar activities happening in other ports around a collaboration between the blue economy that's taking place in the port and academic institutions that are trying to get people into jobs in the marine environment. And so it was helpful for me to see some of the challenges other ports have faced and overcome with respect to things like housing and then curriculum that can accomplish real discrete objectives in getting kids out of high school and getting some measure of expertise and education and getting them right into high-paying, potentially high-paying jobs in the blue economy. And so that was, a huge benefit for me to be involved in listening to other programs. There's a Blue School in Seattle that is super effective. And so I just wanted to draw attention to what our collaboration with SBCC and how, in fact, our objectives and goals are being accomplished in other contexts. And I think it's, a great thing to do.
Thanks, Mr. Voss. Okay, do we have any other public comment or speaker slips for that, Ms. Rodriguez?
We have no other speakers at this time.
Thank you. Okay, any questions from the commission regarding the director's report?
Well, I can't resist the opportunity since I was there. I mean, what the topic is known as workforce development. And there is an increasing amounts of money, at least to date, to encourage that. And the $200,000 grant that Santa Barbara College Foundation and CFSB received was for a workforce development program and developing a curricula that creates a pipeline, and at the end of which you get a job. But for the first time, for me, the program that we got the grants from and the conversations that were national in nature was that it's okay to have a sub-baccalaureate education. You don't have to have a 4-year education to get a quality job. And particularly if you want to go to sea and you want to work in areas that are sustainable and they address climate change as opposed to make climate change. And I'm really proud that our conversations with Santa Barbara City College are along those lines, and we were rewarded by getting a $200,000 grant. So.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay. We can move on to item number 6, the Harbor Operations Report.
All right, Commissioner, this will be me again. I'll channel my inner Nathan Aldridge. He's unfortunately sick tonight. I'll be really brief. Just wanted to share some really good news. This has been a big project for us for the last few years, even more than that, really. 8 or 10 years ago, the Waterfront Department started setting up a reserve, essentially, for the inevitable replacement of our 4 vessels. So this is really the culmination of that. Over the last kind of several years, we've saved money in that reserve for this specific reason, to replace our Harbor Patrol Boat number 3, the large aluminum one, that's coming up on 30 years, so a large term of service. Last week, so a few members of the Waterfront team traveled up to Vallejo, to Moose Boats, where their headquarters and manufacturing production is, for where they produce boats similar and just like this for agencies around the nation. So this is what they do. They build public safety boats. Nathan was able to head up there. One of our officers, Jan Martinez, and of course Mark Stouter got to go up as well. So we sent our best and brightest, and they really got a chance to work with the manufacturer and the builder before delivery, which is kind of invaluable. Next slide. So like I said, this boat will replace boat 3 as it reaches its end of life, and just sort of rejuvenate our fleet with modern technology and just really provide an asset that'll be really useful for exactly what we do. Next slide. From all 3 that went up there, the word was that the boat performed really, really well, and as you can see, just kind of a really unique experience for our Santa Barbara Harbor Patrol boat and our Santa Barbara staff to kind of get some sea time up in the Bay Area and under the Golden Gate. Next slide. Yeah, so our folks got a full day with them. So they took the boat all the way from Vallejo down out to the mouth under the bay, into the open ocean in the Pacific. And so a lot of time kind of putting it through its motions and asking all the questions. And overall, from what I've been told and from what I've seen through the process, Moose Boats has been just fantastic to work with. Held up their end of the bargain, kind of on time, on budget, all the good things with the project, and just really professional, and a real sense that this is what they do every day, and they do it well. So I think we'll be getting a really good product. Next slide. So we're kind of waiting on word from them, but within the next few weeks, they're planning to deliver the vessel down to the harbor. Once we get that date, we're going to plan a kind of small christening ceremony in the harbor. We'll send an invitation to harbor commissioners, council. Mariners are very superstitious, so we'll make sure that when we put this boat in the water, we do it correctly. And so yeah, you'll all receive an invite to attend a small ceremony when we receive this new boat. And everyone asks, what are we going to do with the old one? It is a city asset, so we'll auction it off and see where it ends up. That's all I had. Any questions?
Any questions for Director Wiltshire? Great. Actually, I do have one quick question, kind of unrelated, just because I know that right now, right in the waterfront area, the scuba diving statue is going up. They removed the construction from it, and the foundation is there. Can you guys give us a quick update regarding that?
Yeah, they really pleased with the contractor who did the hardscape work there and kind of set that base. It looks a little unfinished now because it is. They're going to clad that base with sort of granite and a more formal finish within the next couple weeks here. The plan is for the statue itself to be delivered mid-March. There's some intent to try and keep it under wraps a little bit. The Maritime Museum and the folks who really did all the legwork and put all the funding into this project are having a kind of like reveal and ceremony on April 5th. And so that'll be like really the day when it's kind of dedicated to the community and handed over to the waterfront. So, but it's moving along nicely.
Awesome, that's great news. All right, well, without any other questions, we can move on to commission and staff communications. Director Wiltshire, is there any staff communications to update us?
Yeah, I did want to just circle around on one thing. I sent you all an email about that survey from the Sustainability and Resilience Department on the 30-year sea level rise plan. I know that had a lot of like wording in there that was sort of strategic planning related. It wasn't necessarily the intent, and so this Sustainability and Resiliency is sort of managing that $1.3 million grant, has a consultant on hand. They've been down at the waterfront kind of surveying and working with us. As a component of that project, it was to try and kind of gather public input on how they use the waterfront and how gauge the level of awareness of sea level rise and storm impacts. And so this survey is a kind of short 5 or 6 question survey. The intent was to kind of distribute it as broadly as possible so they could get some touch points on how people use the waterfront and how sea level rise would impact them. So again, this is kind of a 12 to 18 month project before we see deliverables, but the waterfront is relying on this part of the project to sort of help dictate where future capital dollars are spent and how we're going to kind of plan for sea level rise going forward.
Great, thanks. No, I always think it's good to get the public input on things like that, So, very helpful. Thanks. Anybody from the commission have any communications they'd like to share?
No, just on that subject, we ought to be part of it. I mean, I guess there ought to be a conversation because I'd hate for us to be developing a process, a parallel process, and they each arrive at different conclusions as opposed to us bringing it together. And if the funding is there to bring it together, then perhaps we should. And given the fact that it's a multi-year project, so if
Great.
they just acknowledged what we were doing, what we're trying to do, and said, okay, this year we're going to do the survey, and next year we will figure out a way to fund your strategic planning process, because we are the waterfront.
All right, thank you. Any other communications? All right, with that, we can move on to adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.